Morning. Hello, my name's Ian Deary, and I'm grateful to the APS for the James McKeen-Cattell Fellowship Award. If you're at the opening ceremony, you'll know that it's almost tearful me to say that my first paper as a psychologist in 1986 was about James McKeen-Cattell. So it's great to come home and do this. So I hope this will be fun. It's my idea for the next wee while. Of course, I've now set myself up so that if it isn't, I've already failed. But that's the title of the talk. And like all bad jokes, it needs explaining. So I've got three ways in which I mean bringing intelligence to life. First of all, resurrecting the zombie Scottish mental surveys that lay dead for a long time. Secondly, how intelligence test scores relate to aspects of people's lives. And also, I have permission from some of the participants in our studies to show you them and how they took part in the surveys and are coming back over half a century later to help us again. So that's the idea. So it's going to be a bit of a weird talk because the whole talk is going to be about the scores that people get from 45 minutes interaction with the Murray House test number 12. And that's all I'm going to talk about. 45 minutes interaction with a pencil and a few bits of paper. It's atheoretical, but I'm going to build, I hope, a nomological network, as Hans Eysenck would have called it for this thing. So, the Murray House test. Do you see what I did there? The cognitive ability test with 9 lives, okay? The cat with 9 lives. Yeah, again, like the second bad joke, you've got to explain it before anybody actually gets it. So what I'm going to do is, we've got 9 sections to the talk. I'm going to show you how we brought the Murray House data to life, how Murray House test scores affect the length of life, how Murray House test scores are being linked in Scotland to data about life, how the Murray House test scores have or do not have stability across most of life, the Murray House test score and social mobility through life, Murray House test score cognitive aging and lifestyle, Murray House test score cognitive aging and biomarkers of life, Murray House, this is a bit contrived, Murray House test scores cognitive aging and the code for life. Actually, I'm now beginning to realize that only a limited number of people are going to be seeing the bottom of the slides. So if you're at the front, you're fine, you can see it. But if you're sitting behind the annoying 7-foot person that always sits in front of me at these things, you won't see it. But the very last one will be Murray House test score, cognitive aging, and the afterlife. Okay, yeah, but it's not contrived, actually, as you'll see. Okay, first of all, section number 1. And some of these sections are quite short, so don't worry, we do get through them in a reasonable amount of time. So Murray House test, bringing Murray House test data to life. So this is resurrecting the Scottish mental surveys. So here's where I pay tribute to Godfrey Thompson, Professor of Education, University of Edinburgh, 1921 to 1950 odd, and he devised the Murray House test number 12 I'm going to talk about. And just to show you some of the things that were said about him by the famous psychometrician P.E. Vernon, you can read it there. His testing unit in Edinburgh was by far the largest purveyor of tests in Europe. In 1949, he sold 1.25 million Murray House tests. He made money from that, precisely 0. All the money went back into hiring staff to make the tests better so poor children from bad backgrounds could be selected for a good education. He devoted all the money to doing that. Thompson was a pioneer in the standardization of tests. It is doubtful whether any other public examination in Europe has been as effectively validated. He strongly deprecated educational segregation. He hated the idea that children were selected away into separate streams of education, even though he did think they should be assessed. And there can be few men who have devoted all their talents more consistently and more selflessly to the pursuit of an educational ideal. His ideal was this, that every poor boy and poor girl deserved a good education, even if they were clever. We found the books in which Thompson devised these tests, and we had them conserved. And in there are the records where he was standardizing the Murray House test number 12 I'm going to talk about today. So the Murray House test number 12 was used in the Scottish Mental Survey of 1932, and that's it. You'd be finished with that in 45 minutes, and those are the 5 pages. And it was used in the Scottish Mental Surveys of 1932 and 1947. And here are some of the questions out of you can get a maximum score of 76 on this test. At the top there, number 13 is a little 3-term series. The middle one's a little bit of coding, and the bottom one is a little bit where you've got to work out which number is in the triangle and the square, but not in the circle. Now, if you're trying to do that at the front, I still can't give you the answer because it's still a copyrighted test, and so I can't actually tell you. So, right. So the Scottish Mental Survey of 1932. So on Monday, June the 1st, 1932, in the morning, Scotland did something that no country has ever done again. It tested the intelligence of the entire nation. 87,000 children, 498. 87,498 children took the Murray House test number 12 with the same instructions right round the country. They got 95% of the population tested. Then they did it all again. 15 years later, 70,805 children were tested on the Wednesday, the 4th of June, 1947, on the same test, the Murray House test number 12. And they compared the 1932 and 1947 surveys. And for those of you who know about it, this was the first and most complete finding of the Flynn effect. There was a slight increase from 1932 to 1947. And these studies were famous. They wrote these 6 books on them between the 1930s and the 1960s. And they were so famous that the original mental surveys were translated in everything from Swedish to Zulu. They were so famous that they were translated. And with regard to concurrent validity, because I gave a version of this talk in London, and Robert Plomin said, well, nobody might believe that these relate to anything, these scores. So just to show you, at age 11, the Scottish Council for Research and Education was the body that did this survey. It tested 1,000 children. As you can see, the boys had a correlation between the Stanford Binet and the Murray House test of 0.81 and the girls 0.78. Later, we've tested 1,000 people at age 70 on 18 cognitive tests. And the G factor, the general cognitive ability factor from 18 tests, correlates 0.781 with the Murray House test administered at age 70 in older age. So it's got concurrent validity both in childhood and in older age against gold standard one-to-one assessments, this a group-administered test. And Godfrey Thompson said in a lecture to the BBC in the Children's Service in 1948, we have begun, we hope, something which succeeding generations will carry on. Perhaps some of you may serve on a mental survey committee of the future when we, if still living, are too old. And that's it, really. And so the Scottish mental surveys die, and they live in various basements for decades, until I write this letter to my friend Lawrence Whalley on the 18th of February 1997, and I'll read a little bit from the bottom. This is my copy. However, the main reason for writing to you is to offer some tentative good news. I have been doing some research about the various cohorts which were tested for intelligence around the 1930s. I've discovered that all 10 and 11-year-old children were tested for IQ in 1932. So between the two of us, Lawrence then sent his wife Patricia off to see if the body, the Scottish Council for Research and Education, was still going, and also to see if it had kept the data. And so we went to this building, annoyingly 15 minutes from my office, and that's in Murray House at Edinburgh, across the road from Godfrey Thompson's office. We got led down this basement by Graham Thorpe, the statistician of the Scottish Council for Research and Education. There's Graham opening up their secure store. Oh, it is actually, yeah, it wasn't a joke, it was their secure store. And there were the Scottish Mental Survey ledgers, still there, decades after they were still there. And I've circled the 1932 ledgers. For those of you who know Scotland, there's an ancient kingdom of Fife. Have you heard of that? Well, that damned ledger disappeared in the 1950s, and we've still never found it. So apart from Fife, they're pretty much all there. And for the 1947, it was complete. And I then sought, with Lauren's permission, to transcribe all of these data and start using them. And so that's what they look like inside. That's the Scottish Mental Survey of 1932 with the copperplate writing of the teachers recording the scores. I chose this page because on it is my father's brother, Richard. So that's Richard Deary, who was on the school there. A 1947 survey was typed, but that's what it looks like inside these books. And so we've been working with data since. So this is my first section. I know it's a bit long, and again, Robert Plomin said to warn you, this is quite a long section to set the foundation, but we get through the other ones, not quite so labored. And my problem in talking to you is, what I want to do is tell you what the team that I work with has done with these data. And here's my problem. Okay. So the team have been rather amazing between Aberdeen and Edinburgh and produced not far short of 400 papers. So let's look at the first thing that we've looked at. The Murray House Test score and the length of life. Does intelligence test score from age 11 relate to survival to older age? If so, why? And this is one of the first things we published, Lawrence, Whalley, and I, in the British Medical Journal, longitudinal cohort study of childhood IQ and survival to age 76. And so here's the bare bones of it. It was data from the Scottish Mental Survey of 1932, and just under 3,000 were tested in Aberdeen. And Lawrence and I decided we would just find them all, whether they were alive or dead. Now, can you think of the problem with that, especially with regard to the women? They were tested at 11. Yeah, different names. So we had to search not just death certificates, we had to search marriage certificates. And it was Lawrence's daughter, Elizabeth, that did most of this by hand. At that time, it took 3 years to do. And so we traced, as you can see, just annoyingly short of 80% to vital status to January 1997. And this is what we found. A 15-point disadvantage in mental ability at age 11 conferred a relative risk of 79% of being alive 65 years later. I'm going to put it even more simply. On average, a girl with a 30-point disadvantage in IQ on this 45-minute test at age 11 was half as likely to be alive all those years later. And we also found, and this is appropriate for Memorial Weekend, men who died during active service in the Second World War had a relatively high score at age 11. And those are the survival curves. And can you all see, does this laser pointer work? It does. So that's the top quartile of girls surviving up to age 70-odd. And that's the bottom quartile. This is at age 11, of course, where everybody's alive. They did the test, so 100% alive. The x-axis is a beautifully simple outcome for a psychologist. It's just dead or alive, that's it. And these are the girls in the bottom quartile. Is that straightforward? So these are the boys. Can you see the difference there? This is the slaughtering of the high IQ quartile of men in the Second World War. And here's one of the high IQ men who died in the Second World War, who took part in that survey. That's my Uncle Richard. And that's his score. So again, of course, it doesn't work here, but if you look down, he had a score of 53 out of 76, IQ of 120. He lived, his father was a labourer, his brothers were miners. He lived in a one-bedroomed house with 6 children and 2 parents. Very poor social background, but this funny little test was able to say he could have gone to university, even maybe the University of Edinburgh, who knows, but maybe it's not quite high enough for that at that time. Right. What I want to say is we've gone on to do many other studies looking at original mental ability score and survival. And one of our super postdocs, Catherine Calvin, did this systematic review and meta-analysis recently. And you can see that Catherine there said a standard deviation advantage in cognitive test scores was associated with a 24% lower risk of death during a 17 to 69-year follow-up. Similar for men and women mostly. and background social class was not a confounder. But what I want to show you is this. Here's the forest plot, and out of the 16 studies we had found by 2011, that's nice, I'll do it again, 3 of those studies out of the 16 across the world were based on follow-up studies of the Murray House test from the Scottish Mental Surveys. We've also looked at various mediators, and I'll just show you one example of a specific outcome. We searched the dementia databases in Scotland and found that vascular, but not Alzheimer's dementia, was associated with a lower ability. So let me just repeat that. Lower mental ability at age 11 on the Scottish Mental Survey was associated with a greater risk of vascular, but not Alzheimer-type dementia. Okay, so with regard to length of life, what have the Scottish Mental Surveys contributed? They've almost originated the field that we call cognitive epidemiology. They've produced many novel cognitive epidemiology studies and much study of specific illnesses and mediators that I don't have time to talk about. So with regard to the next section, Murray House test scores and linkage to data about life. So in Scotland, we act as a single health service. And if one asks, one can get permission to link data anonymously to death and hospital statistics outcomes. So I'm not going to deal with this in a long way, but how comprehensively can we link Scottish Mental Survey data with health data? So we've just decided to link the entire population. So we've asked for and got permission to link the entire mental surveys to hospital and death data. And I'm afraid this is a bit of a spoiler. I talked about that yesterday. Okay, I was hoping the talks might turn the other way around, but I talked about that in the cross-cutting theme yesterday. But just to summarize, with regard to the Scottish Mental Survey 1947, can we read from the bottom up, please? We've linked 98.8% of the twins, 99.8% of the 6-day sample, that's a subsample of the survey, 96%, and we're already at 92.3% of the whole country, with still more to go. We think we'll get 97% linkage to later health outcomes. But that's that. So the next section I'm going to look at is Murray House test score stability across most of life. Question here is simple. How stable are individual differences in intelligence test scores between childhood and older age? And that's the first thing we did. The stability of individual differences in mental ability from childhood to old age, follow-up of the 1930, that's too long a title, follow-up of the 1932 Scottish Mental Survey. So again, this was Lawrence Whalley and I want to emphasize that most of the testing we do in older age is done one-to-one. But we did something that was a bit cheesy. On the 60th anniversary, on the 66th anniversary of the Scottish Mental Survey 1932, we asked 100 people back in Aberdeen to sit the test on June the 1st, 1998, 66 years to the day after taking the original test. Same test again, and I read out the same instructions that they'd had when they were aged 11. And here they are. That's the music hall in Aberdeen, and I always say the same thing about this slide. They absolutely loved it. I have no idea why they're looking so bloody miserable in the photograph, because they really enjoyed it. And what did we find? So this is giving the same test with the same instructions 66 years apart. And the Pearson R correlation between the same test given at 1932 and 1998 was 0.63, uncorrected for restriction of range. I'm not going into that. You probably know why there's restriction of range, which there is, but the uncorrected correlation is 0.63. Right. We've done more stability. Now, let me introduce you to the, anybody not know what the Lothian area is of Scotland? So, if a Walter Scott fan, you'll know Heart of Midlothian. Lothian area is the Edinburgh area, and that's where I work, and I've led the recruitment of the Lothian Birth Cohort. This is the Lothian Birth Cohort of 1921. There's 550 of them when we first recruited them in about 2000, and that's 3 of them. And that school picture there is not any old school picture. Those 3 ladies in the Lothian Birth Cohort actually are in that picture at about age 11 when they first did the Murray House test at age 11. Oh, I meant to say they're talking to another old lady there as well, this lady here, who's looking at the Murray House test with them, and they're explaining about it, and she did say it looked a bit difficult. And we've called these people back who took part, 550 of them, And we've seen them at age 79, 83, 87, 90, and 92. The 90 was really special. I asked my team to call them back and test them as close to their 90th birthday as possible. And then we screw things up a bit. Even at 92, we then asked, would they all agree to be brain scanned as well? And most of them did. But this is about stability, this section. So let me show you this. So can you look at the x-axis and the y-axis? And I try not to get used to this because it's quite an unusual thing to show. On the x-axis is the Murray House test score out of 76 converted to an IQ score at age 11. And up the y-axis is almost age 80. We're almost 70 years apart, and the correlation is 0.66, uncorrected for restriction of range. And that's the scattergram. That's the scattergram. So that's the correlation. The same test given at age 11 and 79, it's 0.66. Okay. Then we tested them at age 11. And thanks for accepting this paper for Psychological Science. It's always a bit of a hit and miss when you send it there, isn't it? Sometimes they like it, sometimes they don't. They like this one. And this is where we gave the same test 80 years later. So they took the same test at age 11 and age 90. And I have to sing the praises of Alison Patty here. She used to be a nurse. She's worked with me since the very beginning. It was just one man and Alison Patty when we started this whole operation. I've now got 20 staff that tell me what to do. But Alison and I started it, and she tested every single one of these people at age 90 on the Murray House test, number 12. And that's the correlation. 0.537. Between age 11 and age 90 on the same 45-minute test. But here's the real thing. Bringing Intelligence to Life, remember, is the title of the talk. Bringing Intelligence to Life. Well, it's poignant because that's the scattergram from age 79, 80, and that's it from age 90. And the obvious thing has happened. Even though I'm sure some of these folks will see me out. Right, and that's the correlation between 11, 79, and 11 and 90. So what have we contributed in the follow-up studies of the Scottish Mental Survey? The longest follow-up studies of intelligence test score in the literature. But the more important thing is not the stability. The thing that we're after is the instability. What we're interested in is how much people change from childhood to older age. So they've made the foundation of our cognitive aging studies. And they also are able to address confounding and reverse causation. We'll come back to some fun with confounding in a wee while. But what I want to do is just take a little detour in this next section and look at the Murray House test score and social mobility through life. Are intelligence test scores from age 11 related to getting on in life? And if so, what else is? So let me just tell you about this study. The Scottish Mental Survey of 1932, we asked for permission to link it with the Midspan collaborative study in Scotland, taken part between 1970 and 1973. Now, just think about it. The people who took part in the Scottish Mental Survey of 1932 were all born in 1921. They tested 95% of the population, so that's pretty much the whole population. So can you work out that in the Midspan collaborative study in Scotland, they'd be in their 50s, and that pretty much everybody taking part in that study who was born in 1921 would have taken part in the Scottish Mental Survey. So we asked for permission to link, and we found 243 men who took part in both studies. We had age 11 IQ, education, father's social class, the social class of their first job, social position in midlife, and we tried to model the process of childhood to midlife social change. Now, do you get the idea of what we're trying to do there? All we had from the Scottish Mental Survey in 1932 was the IQ test score, but linking it to this Midspan study provided all the rest. And things get even more creepy, because watch this. Those are some pictures from the Midspan study. So you can tell it was the 1970s. This is the van. They went right round the west of Scotland, and there's the setup in the lab. That's the 1932 Scottish Mental Survey that we linked it from. And that's a chap called Victor Hawthorne, professor of epidemiology, who started the Midspan studies. And guess what? He was a subject in the Scottish Mental Survey of 1932. And there he is. And he was very old, and I took him to see this, and he had a tear in his eye when he was looking at his own entry. But can you also see it's 4 points lower than my uncle's? And he was a professor of epidemiology. And I'm afraid my uncle ended in a submarine at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea. Right, so what did we find in this study? I just want to show you a couple of things. This is a latent trait of social position in midlife, in people's 50s. And I just want you to see that age 11 IQ has got a lower association with the class of the first job than it has with social position in midlife. And this is sometimes called the centrifugal effect, that people who are bright will eventually get to their cognitive level. Of course, it's a structural equation model, so you'd be quite right to say, yeah, but you can't really have that, because that's a latent trait on the right-hand side, and first job is a manifest variable, so it's not going to be as reliable. Accept that. But anyway, some idea that it might be a centrifugal effect. But if you look at the contributors to midlife social position, mental ability contributes, so does education, so does the class of the first job, and so does father's social class. So the story here is not just meritocracy or social inertia, it's a bit of both. It's a bit of both. Social background as well as ability, as well as education, all contribute. Now, we've done more than that. I'm going to introduce you to the Lothian birth cohort 1936 in a wee while. But that's one of the things that we've done. In fact, this is one of my colleagues, Wendy Johnson, who doesn't take any prisoners when it comes to structural equation models. But I just want to show you in this ugly model a couple of fairly simple things. Can you see at the right-hand side that we're modeling offspring social class, okay? And a big contributor is offspring education. But what I want to point out is this. This is the participant of the Scottish Mental Survey of 1947. This is them telling us about their parents, and this is them telling us about their offspring. And so we've got a coverage of 3-generation social mobility across the whole of the 20th century in Scotland. So if you ask the question, how does the offspring of the Lothian birth cohort 1936 get to where they are in midlife? It's a combination of their own education, their parents' social class, their parents' intelligence, their parents' education, their grandfather's social class, and their grandfather's education. The effects on getting to where you are stretch back a long way across the generations and time. And again, somebody else who doesn't take any prisoners is the quantitative sociologist Lindsay Patterson. Lindsay's a senior professor, but at the same time he said, Ian, I'm going to take all your 1,000+ people in the Lothian birth cohort 1936, I'm going to grade their schools. There are 6 types of secondary school in Scotland for these people who went to school in the 1940s and 1950s, and he graded every single one. And what he found in this study that just came out recently was this, and let me just explain, it's not that easy to see, but that's the main thing, and it's this, that in addition to one's parents' education, in addition to one's parents' social class, in addition to one's sex, in addition to one's age 11 cognitive ability on the Murray House test at age 11, the type of school you went to contributes to your social class in middle age. Isn't that amazing? Just the type of school you went to in addition to all of these factors. So again, the old school tie is the cliche, but it seems to work to some extent there as well. So in terms of social mobility through life, what the mental survey's data have contributed is many studies of the interplay between parental social class, education, schools, and intelligence and social position, and transgeneration study of social mobility across most of the 20th century. Right, now we're going to look at really pretty much what the day job is. That is, most of the work we do is trying to find out why some people's brains and cognitive functions age better than others. And that's not a bad, that's my elevator pitch, okay? Although here you'd have a bit longer to say that, wouldn't you? Especially waiting for the elevators, you'd have quite a long time. So which lifestyle factors are associated with healthier cognitive aging? No, I mean really associated and not just confounded by intelligence scores at age 11. Right, okay. So these are data from the Aberdeen birth cohorts of 1921 and 1936, and those are led by Lawrence Foley, and the Lothian birth cohorts in Edinburgh of 1921 and 1936. So let me introduce you to Bill from the Lothian birth cohort 1936. So they are 1,091 strong, and that was Bill about age 11 when he did the Murray House test score in the Scottish Mental Survey of 1947. And that was Bill at age 70 in 2006. And we've also seen the Lothian birth cohort 1936 at age 73, 76, and 79. So, in fact, they're in the field just now. We're about a third of the way seeing them at 79. So, oh, there they are too. So that's some of the Lothian birth cohort of 1936 at one of our reunions. And if you are interested in catching up quickly about the Lothian birth cohort 1936, Science kindly ran a 4-page article on the Lothian birth cohort 1936 on Halloween 2014. However, I did notice, I've been coming to these award addresses, I noticed everybody's got a book. I actually don't have a book to sell. However, books are too long. What people really want is something that's the size of a credit card. So if you want, and of course this doesn't cost anything either. So if you're interested in Lothian birth cohort 1936, we've made these little fast facts cards. And they're free, and you can come and pick them up at the end for nothing. We're quite good at merchandising in the Lothian birth cohort 1936. That's not gratuitous. There's something in there I'm going to show you in a wee while. So I want to be clear what we're doing in looking at lifestyle contributions to lifetime cognitive aging. And here's Miss Lawson. And that's Miss Lawson with a picture of herself at age 11 when she took the Murray House test and got a certain score. And that's her at age 70 when she first came back to see us. Now, can you all get the idea that we can then study factors that contribute to how much people change between 11 and 70? Is that all right? Because I'm going to show you a lot of these things in a wee while, okay? And we call that lifetime. Steven Pinker's ghost is somewhere. Yeah, I don't mind sneer quotes because they do let you off in case you don't want to say that's the full lifetime, but lifetime cognitive aging. Now, I am also going to make it clear we follow them up every 3 years. So we also do within older age cognitive aging. So that's Miss Lawson at 70, 73, and 76. When you direct studies, you make some bad decisions that your staff never damn well tell you about. And I said, we're not using these photographs. Don't take a picture at 79. And can you imagine how annoyed I am when you come to put this slide together and you say, I haven't got a picture at 79. So that was a stupid idea. Okay. However, what I'm going to concentrate on for a wee while is factors that seem to affect change from 11 to 70. But I want to show you something else first. Do you all know about the idea of fluid and crystallized ability? Yes? Okay. Fluid ability is sort of thinking on your feet. Anybody recognize him? He's a member of the Lothian birth cohort of 1936. He took part in the Scottish Mental Survey of 1947. That's him at age 70. That's him at age 76. Now, at age 79, with the Lothian birth cohort of 1936, for the first time, in addition to the 16 mental tests we give them already, we gave them Raven's progressive matrices. Okay? You've got to listen to this. We gave them Raven's progressive matrices. That's John Raven. That's John Raven. Son of John Raven, who invented the tests. John Raven has been working his whole life with Raven's progressive matrices. It's been his whole life. And John has given me permission to show his picture and to show this quote. He was surprised because we hadn't used Raven's matrices in the occasions before then, when he'd seen us at 70, 73, 76. He comes back at 79, and here's this test sitting in front of him. But he let me show you this next thing. Going back to my own session, having lived with the test most of my life, I was amazed and disturbed to find that however much I tried, I could not discern any pattern in items D11 and D12. Just could not latch on to anything which might make sense to them. This is fluid intelligence in action. Okay, he no longer could work out the Raven's matrices. Now, he wasn't laughing when he said that, but he was kind in letting me show that. So back to Miss Lawson. So here's the idea. So with regard to mental ability and how it declines or changes with age, what I'm saying here is when it comes to older age, there's a spread of mental ability, even amongst folk who started off at the same level. But what almost every study lacks is a baseline for cognitive ability in the premorbium when people are still well. And I used to always show this cartoon, and I said, actually, why don't we just show the real data? So That is the Lothian birth cohort 1936. On the x-axis is the Murray House test score at age 11. On the y-axis is the Murray House test score at age 70. And one of my uncontrollably brilliant postdoctoral staff, Stuart Ritchie, who's here today, I said, Stuart, can we just actually show this in terms of how much each person's changed from their own baseline? And that's it. That's age 11 on the same test, and that's age 70. And you folks in the audience, you want to know what's up with these guys. Because these are the people who've bucked the trend and are doing much better than you would expect in older age compared to youth. And these are the folks who we want to know what they did wrong or how unlucky they got, whether they chose their parents unwisely, etc. And most people, as in most normal distributions, are in the middle. So just let me emphasize, we study normal cognitive aging. We do ascertain for dementia, but we're studying normal cognitive aging. And our work is simple. This is all we try and do. It's how do you get that? How do you get or retain good cognition in older age? And would you just read down and see if you agree that some of these factors might be the case? Being bilingual, having more education, having a more complex job, having more social support, being less lonely, having a higher level of the personality trait of intellect, and more typical intellectual engagement on day-to-day, and engaging in more socio-intellectual activity. So, now, this is inexcusable. Now, again, most of you can't see. At the bottom, I've put the references to all of these in case you're interested, but I know that most of you can't actually see them, but they are all there. What I'm saying is inexcusable is to put 6 papers on one slide, okay? So there you go. So are any of these associated? Most of these are done by either GLM, so ANOVA, or linear regression in separate papers, but those are the basic results. People who are bilingual, more educated, have a more complex job, or had a more complex job, had more social support, were less lonely, had more intellect and typical intellectual engagement, and engaged in more socio-intellectual activity. They all had better cognition in older age, okay? Right. But this talk is about why it's special having these age 11 scores. We can also ask this. We can also ask, for all of these factors that we gather in older age, are any of them related to having a good Murray House test score at age 11? And the answer is yes, some of them are. So the smarter kids were more likely to be bilingual, more educated, in a more complex job, have higher intellect, and engage in more socio-intellectual activity. Now, I'm hoping you can complete the rest of it. In our linear regressions and general linear models, we then ask, do these cross-sectional associations in older age survive controlling for a 60-year-old 45-minute test score? And here's the answer. Some don't. Okay, so look at the bottom first. These associations here, having high intellect and engaging in more socio-intellectual activity, are entirely confounded. So once you take the age 11 IQ test score, there's absolutely no association any longer with these. So it's smart children who grow up to be older people who engage in a lot of socio-intellectual activity. It's not the socio-intellectual activity that's making the brain smarter in older age. However, it's not the case with all of them. These social factors seem to be genuine contributors to cognition in older age, and some of them, it worked both ways. Smarter children became more bilingual, who in turn seemed to be preserving their cognition better in older age. And I was just going to show the bases of a couple of these. So with regard to intellect and typical intellectual engagement, this is a little structural equation model that I did for this. And the key thing is there are no significant cross-sectional associations once you take into account the confounding effect of a 60-year-old test. And with regard to education, again, this is Stuart Ritchie's work. Age 11 ability contributes to general cognitive function at age 70. And years of education contribute to individual test scores, but not to G in older age. And just to make it absolutely clear, there are paths there, but there's no path there. Okay, so that's that, with some warnings. These were done on different cohorts, some of them the Lothian cohort of 21 and 36. They're not multivariate. All these factors were not put into the same models. The effect sizes are small. I need to emphasize this. When we find effects on cognitive ability in older age, The biggest contributor is what your ability was when you were young. That's about 50% of the variance. The other factors tend to add 1 or 2% of the variance. So it's small effects. They're not always the same test in older age, and we realize you do need replication and meta-analyses. So everybody wants to know, if I eat the right things, will I be smarter in older age? So I'm going to show quite a lot of these things, but it's all the same format as the ones I just showed, okay? Is that all right? Right, here we go. So is eating the Mediterranean diet, avoiding the traditional Scottish diet? Yeah, you're laughing, but it's true. Yeah. Antioxidants, alcohol. Oh, by the way, I have to say, the Lothian birth cohort are not big drinkers, but in everything we've found, drinking more alcohol is good for cognition in older age, okay? So it's positive. Coffee, flavonoids that you get from tea and apples, and body mass index. And these are the associations. So in the published work, a lot of it done by Janie Corley in our group, who's been absolutely super. Eating the Mediterranean diet, avoiding fried pizzas and fried Mars bars, having more antioxidants, drinking more alcohol, drinking posh coffee, eating more flavonoids, and having a lower body mass index are all associated with good cognition in older age. But of course, the main thing is bringing this to life. We've got these old cognitive data. So are any of these things associated these are all taken at age 70 on a food frequency questionnaire. They are. So smarter children end up eating different stuff and being lighter, having a lower body mass index. So the main thing is, do any of these older age associations survive? None. I quite like that, actually. I'll do it again. It's entirely confounded. There is nothing in any of these in the Lothian birth cohort that seem to preserve cognitive function in older age. They're all confounded. The confounding is generally about 66 to 90% confounding in the effect sizes, and they all reduce to non-significance. So what have the Scottish Mental Surveys contributed? Which lifestyle factors might be genuine contributors to healthy cognitive aging, and which might be confounded by Murray-House test score? Now, you might not think that the Murray-House test score could confound biomarkers, but let's just briefly look at those. Murray-House test score, cognitive aging, and biomarkers of life. Which biological factors, so-called biomarkers, associated with healthier cognitive aging? No, I mean really associated, and not just confounded by intelligence test scores at age 11. So if you look down, you'll recognize some of these. Generally speaking, I know, I used to be a medical doctor before I became a psychologist, and I would know that in older age it's good to have higher B12, higher folate, lower homocysteine, more good cholesterol, lower inflammation, that's C-reactive protein, not to be infected by the cytomegalovirus, have longer telomere length, and have a topography of one's retinal vessels at the back of the eye that looks good, because that's the one place in the body that you can see the brain's blood vessels. Who doesn't know what telomere length is? Does anybody not know? Yeah, you at the back, I'll talk to you, right. You're just the honest one. So telomeres are the little bed socks that we wear at the end of our chromosomes. Otherwise, chromosomes, do you know that thing that you get in a jumper if you get a loose thread and it starts to, we call it in Scotland, ribble out? It all tears out. Well, chromosomes would do that if you didn't have these little bed socks called telomeres. And about 15 years ago, I read papers by a guy called Thomas von Ziegelinski in Newcastle, and it looked to me like telomeres were the biomarker. And I've spent a huge amount of money in the Lothian birth cohorts testing telomere length. And what a waste of money it's been. Although it does mean I get to co-author papers with the guy with the best name in science, Thomas von Ziegelinski. Okay. So I'm not gonna beat about the bush here. These are the results, okay? So positive means these are preservative of cognitive function in older age, and negative means it's a bad thing. And telomere length, just to flash up how annoyed I am that we're doing interesting stuff with telomere length. Retinal vessels, I'm still not sure. We've wasted thousands of man hours on those as well. But the interesting thing is these Murray-House test scores from age 11 are related to having more B12, more folate, more good cholesterol, being less inflamed in older age. And they're associated with the cytomegalovirus. Now, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So what I'm going to show you is the confounding. So one that drops out as confounded is inflammation. So when we wrote our first paper on inflammation and cognition, there was some evidence that being less inflamed in the bloodstream was associated with better cognition in older age, but we found even that was confounded. So the story was that brighter children become less inflamed in older age, but that does not have a causal association with cognitive ability in older age. But I think there should be a little thing here. Yeah, there it goes, cytomegalovirus. Very interesting, the cytomegalovirus. For those of you who don't know, in the Lothian birth cohort, probably like you guys, 2/3 of them are infected by it. And probably 2/3 in this audience have got infected by the cytomegalovirus. It's associated not just with lower mental ability in childhood, but also with poor background, overcrowding conditions. And what we found was extremely interesting. It was that people who were infected by the cytomegalovirus, that was confounded. It was associated with lower ability in childhood, but not in older age. But those people who were infected, we measured their antibody titration, and those people who were devoting more of their immune system to dealing with the cytomegalovirus as they got older had lower cognition. So it's a rather sort of detailed story going on there. Just to show you one or two of these things. Oh, there's another one. So people with a more symmetrical body had better cognition in older age. Women with a later menopause had better cognition in older age. People with fewer physical anomalies, more physically fit people. And amazingly, nobody in our cohort had schizophrenia, but those with a lower polygenic risk of schizophrenia had better cognition in older age. There's one confounder here, and it's age at menopause that's highly confounded. So let me show you one or two. On the left, can you see this man? You can't, actually. That's 50 men from the Lothian birth cohort, 1921, superimposed onto each other to look at facial symmetry. On the right, David Hope, poor PhD student, he measured thousands of these fingers to see how curved they were, and that's one of the little physical anomalies that we looked at, and that's terrible, so let's do this. That's the menopause one. There was an association between later menopause and higher cognition in childhood and higher cognition in older age. But if you do the structural equation model, it's confounded. That is, the brighter women or brighter girls tend to have a later menopause and be smarter in older age. And there's no causal association. And possibly the best biomarker that we're known for is brain imaging. And our Lothian birth cohort 1936 study is sometimes called the disconnected mind, and this is white matter rendered. This is not a cartoon. These are false color illustrations of how well one can measure using diffusion tensor imaging the white matter in the brain of somebody in Lothian birth cohort 1936. That's a side view, and that's a top-down view. And Lars Penke led the study where we showed that brain white matter structure accounted for about 10% of the variance in cognitive function in older age. But I don't want to tell you about that. I want to tell you about this. Now, this is just coming out in molecular psychiatry, or it's just come out, and associations between cognitive ability and brain cortical thickness in older age. Now, I've scribbled out the first part of the title not to give the game away, but I just want to show you, we looked at cortical thickness. This is Mr. Scott. He's a member of the Lothian birth cohort of 1936. He was a minor, and he's let us show this. And the reason I've shown you, he's got one of the best preserved brains that we've seen, because there's a huge variation in range. And we liked his brain so much that we printed it. And here it is. That's a 3D print of that man's brain. There it is there. And that's 73-year-old's brain that we've printed in the Lothian birth cohort 1936. So, get back to the article. Right, this is simple. So, yellow and red on the screen. If an area is yellow and red, having a thicker brain cortex is associated with a higher Murray House Test ISQ score at age 70. Simple, cross-sectional association. Is that all right? So lots of areas. So then, of course, you probably realize what I'm going to do now. I'm going to say, well, was cortical thickness associated with the 60-year-old test scores? To some extent, yes. So let me just be clear. That's age 11, Murray House Test score IQ, associated with brain cortical thickness in the 70s. Now, That's the age 70 score. Murray-House test related to cortical thickness. Now I'm going to adjust for the age 11 score, and that's what's left. So let's just go back. So if we were publishing this, we'd be saying, look, there's a lot of evidence that cortical thickness is associated with better cognitive function in older age. Let's find out what gets you a thicker cortex. Well, that's what's left after you account for mental ability that's 60 years old. And you do occasionally get referees saying, what a pity you didn't brain scan them at age 11. When, of course, we know they hadn't invented magnetism at that time. Right, and so that was the bit I was hiding. Childhood cognability explains. So what have we contributed? Which biomarkers might be genuine contributors to healthy cognitive aging, and which might be confounded by childhood MHT score? And we're just about done now. So I'm just going to quickly show you a few genetic results. Murray-House test score, cognitive aging, and the code for life. So what have we contributed? Well, here's a nice paper that we did a while ago. Now, if you know about ApoE, about a quarter of you in this audience have got the epsilon 4 flavor of the gene for apolipoprotein E that sits on chromosome 19. And 3/4 have got the good guy. You've not got the E4 version. And what we did was we split the Lothian birth cohort 1921 into the quarter with the E4 and the quarter without. And quite simply, there was no difference in the Murray-House test score at age 11, and there was a big difference at age 79. Now, isn't that a nice result? There's a genetic contribution to cognition that's not there in childhood, but is there in older age, probably because that gene is associated. No, the interaction's significant. It's not there in childhood.
I was wondering about the Alzheimer's result.
Okay. Everybody there was excluded if they had Alzheimer's. This is all normal. Good question. That's the first thing that often gets asked. This isn't down to Alzheimer's disease. Right, good. And I should say, testing the 2 single nucleotide polymorphisms for ApoE in 1999 cost me £15 sterling. And then by the time we got to do just about 5 years ago, this cost me about £270 sterling. We did 610,000 single nucleotide polymorphisms on every single person. And I'm just going to show you them. We were lucky. Gail Davies, I've got to sing the praises of here, postdoc in our group, published first decent-sized genome-wide study of general cognitive function. And she used the new method that Robert Plomin calls the first method in a century that's genuinely new in statistical genetics, GCTA, and estimated for the first time the heritability of cognition based on DNA and not based on twins or adoptees, and estimated about 40%. And then we subsequently showed ApoE locus associated with non-pathological cognitive aging in GWAS studies. And then in this paper, we showed that the change in cognitive function from childhood to older age is about 24% genetic and about 76% environmental. And we also showed that the genetic correlation between cognition in childhood and older age is 0.62. And Gail has just led, and I think there's some people from Charge here, absolutely fantastic collaboration we've been involved in. But again, just to sing the praises of Gail, who with other colleagues led this, we joined up the Lothian birth cohorts with 29 other cohorts and got a sample of 53,900 odd and found the first ever Manhattan plot. And it's nice to say that in Manhattan, that actually is a Manhattan plot. And it's got the occasional skyscrapers, albeit Manhattan in the 1920s rather than now. But we found the first genome-wide significant associations with general cognitive function. So that was the genetic stuff, the first GWAS studies of cognition in older age, and of the change across the life course, and of cognitive aging. So my very last one is MHT score, cognitive aging, and the afterlife. So I'll just 1 minute on this. So the first afterlife is obituary. Agnes Davies took part in the Scottish Mental Survey of 1932, and this was in her obituary in a national newspaper. In 1931, seek it was 1932, the young Agnes had at age 10 taken part in a Scotland-wide IQ test and came top in the country. We checked. She didn't. She had a She had a good score, but she wasn't top in the country. Right. So, I just want to say to finish, I wrote this and now I think it's a bit icky, so I apologize. So basically what's going to happen with these studies going into the next 10 years or so, the Lothian birth cohort studies are going to continue to the end. Some of them are going to see me out. We are now doing new things with our cohorts. We bother them enough, but we're strapping activity meters to them for a week, in addition to brain scanning and 16 cognitive tests and all the medical things that we do. They're now going to be whole genome sequenced. Instead of 610,000 single nucleotide polymorphisms, we're doing 3 billion on all of the Lothian birth cohort 1921 and 1936. We're doing transcriptomics of their blood cells. We're looking at protein expression from the cells. We're collecting a normal cognitive aging brain tissue bank. At one of our reunions, they started asking us, why don't you want our brains when we die? You've done enough to us already. And so about a third of them have signed up to a brain tissue bank. And we're also doing a stem cell bank. So let me show you a couple of pictures. So when you do a brain tissue these days, you don't actually take out the whole brain at postmortem, you take sections from it. But this is from the very first person in the Lothian birth cohort, 1936, to donate brain tissue. And this is done by Chris Henstridge, Tom Gillingwater, Colin Smith, and Tara Spires-Jones. And this is, as you can probably see, lighting up some of the proteins in the brains. But I just want to show you the electron microscopy comparing this woman from the Lothian birth cohort who died and her family donated her brain with an Alzheimer's disease patient. I want to quote Tara Spires-Jones, who's leading this bit. Tara Spires-Jones said, "These synapses are beautiful, even in death, in the afterlife." And my very last thing is this. This is the usual scattergram. Age 11 adjusted Murray-House test score on the x-axis, older age Murray-House test score on the y-axis. And can you see we've got some red people who haven't aged so well? And some blue people who've aged very well. Is that clear, the way they disappear off the regression line? Well, they're the ones we're targeting for stem cell work. So what we're going to do is, these people, we're going to take white blood cells, we're going to change them into pluripotent stem cells, we're going to change those pluripotent stem cells into neurons, into glia, to astrocytes, to oligodendrocytes, and in a jar, we're going to ask, how come this brain aged so well or so badly? And in addition to the 9 bottles of blood we take already, we need 3 extra bottles to do the stem cell work, and that's funded by the Dementias Platform UK. So what have I told you? We've brought Murray-House data to life. Murray-House data relates to longer life. We've linked Murray-House data comprehensively to data about life. Murray-House test scores are moderately to highly stable across most of life. Murray-House test score relates to social mobility through life. Murray-House test score relates to lifestyle, which is linked in some cases to cognitive aging and sometimes confounded. Murray-House test score relates to biomarkers of life, linked to cognitive aging in some cases, but some cases confounded. Murray-House test score relates to DNA, the code of life, and the work on the Murray-House test score continues into the subject's afterlife. So just some thanks. The LBC and Aberdeen cohorts research teams, the cognitive epidemiology research team, the 6-day sample research team. That's Lawrence that I've worked with for 20 years now, John Starr, Joanna Wardlaw, Mark Baston, who work on the Lothian cohorts. Various funders have been bothered to part with money to support these, but especially Age UK and the Medical Research Council. But of course, the Scottish Council for Research and Education. Thank goodness they kept those data after all these years. And if you want anything, I do answer emails. Thanks very much.